everyone, welcome back to NightScaryDream. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get comfy. It's time to start the story. I had been driving for hours, the GPS leading me down a winding road that seemed to stretch on forever. My wife, Sarah, was asleep in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window. I yawned, feeling the weight of the long drive bearing down on me. We had left our friend's wedding hours ago, and I was eager to get home and collapse into bed. As I rounded a curve, the trees seemed to close in around me, casting long, ominous shadows on the road. I shivered, despite the warmth of the summer evening. Suddenly, the GPS announced our arrival at our destination. But as I looked around, I realized that we were nowhere near home. The GPS had led us down a dirt road, surrounded by nothing but trees and darkness. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized we were lost. "Sarah, wake up," I whispered, shaking her gently. She stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around in confusion. "I don't know," I admitted. "The GPS said we were here, but..." Sarah's eyes widened as she took in our surroundings. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, trying to stay calm. "I know. I'll turn around and try to find our way back." But as I turned the car around, I realized that we were not alone. A pair of headlights was approaching us, casting an eerie glow over the trees. My heart began to pound as the other car drew closer. Who is it? And what do they want? As the car pulled up beside us, I saw a figure in the driver's seat. He was tall and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. "Hello," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Welcome to my road." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we were in grave danger. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. "Thanks," I said, trying to sound friendly. "We're just trying to find our way home." The gaunt man nodded, his eyes glinting in the darkness. "I can help you with that," he said. "But first, you have to come with me." I exchanged a nervous glance with Sarah. Something didn't feel right. "I don't think that's necessary," I said, trying to sound firm. "We can just turn around and go back the way we came." The gaunt man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You don't want to do that," he said. "Trust me." Sarah and I exchanged another nervous glance. We were trapped in the middle of nowhere, with no phone signal and no way to escape. The gaunt man seemed to sense our fear. He leaned in, his eyes glinting with malevolence. "Come with me," he repeated, his voice dripping with menace. "I'll show you the way home." I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but Sarah's grip on my arm was tightening, and I knew we had to get out of there. "Okay," I said finally, trying to sound calm. "We'll come with you." The gaunt man grinned, his teeth glinting in the darkness. "Excellent choice," he said, gesturing for us to follow him. As we drove behind him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. The trees seemed to close in around us, casting long, ominous shadows on the road. And then we saw it. A house loomed in the distance, its windows glowing with an eerie light. The gaunt man pulled up in front of the house, gesturing for us to get out. "Welcome to my home," he said, his eyes glinting with malevolence. I felt a chill run down my spine as we stepped out of the car. We were trapped, with no way to escape, and I knew that we were in grave danger. As we stepped out of the car, the gaunt man gestured for us to follow him. We hesitated, unsure of what to do, but he seemed to sense our fear, and his grin grew wider. "Come on," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "I'll show you around." We followed him, our hearts pounding in our chests. The house loomed above us, its windows seeming to stare at us like empty eyes. As we stepped inside, I was struck by the eerie atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls seemed to press in on us. The gaunt man led us deeper into the house, pointing out strange and sinister objects along the way. We saw ancient artifacts, taxidermied animals, and even a collection of antique medical equipment. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being led deeper into some kind of trap, but the gaunt man seemed to sense our fear, and his grin grew wider. "We're almost there," he said, his voice dripping with excitement. Finally, we arrived at a large wooden door. The gaunt man produced a key, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. As we stepped inside, I was struck by the sight before us. The room was filled with rows of old hospital beds, each one occupied by a figure shrouded in shadows. The gaunt man gestured for us to approach. "Welcome to my family," he said, his voice dripping with malevolence. As we drew closer, I realized that the figures on the beds were not what they seemed. They were twisted and deformed, their bodies seeming to melt into the shadows. I felt a scream rising in my throat as I realized the horrifying truth. The gaunt man was not what he seemed. He was something ancient and evil, something that had been awakened by some dark and malevolent force. And we were trapped in his lair, with no way to escape. The twisted figure's voice was low and raspy, and it sent shivers down my spine. "Help me," it whispered, its eyes fixed on mine. I was taken aback. I had thought that the figures on the beds were just mindless zombies, but this one seemed to be aware. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure's eyes seemed to cloud over, and it took a few moments before it responded. "I was a doctor," it whispered. "I worked with him." It nodded towards the gaunt man, who was watching us with a sinister grin. "What did he do to you?" I asked, feeling a surge of anger. The doctor's eyes seemed to fill with tears. "Experimented on me," it whispered. He twisted my mind and body. I felt a wave of horror wash over me. The gaunt man was not just a monster. He was a sadist who enjoyed inflicting pain and suffering on others. The doctor's eyes seemed to lock onto mine, and I saw a glimmer of determination. "Help me escape," it whispered. "Please." I nodded, feeling a sense of resolve. I would do whatever it took to help the doctor escape and to bring the gaunt man to justice. But as I looked around, I realized that it wouldn't be easy. The gaunt man had us trapped, and he would stop at nothing to keep us here. I knew that I had to come up with a plan, and fast. But as I looked at the doctor, I saw something that gave me hope. A small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a signal, a sign that the doctor was ready to fight back. And with that, our plan was set in motion. As we stood there, frozen in terror, the gaunt man began to laugh. It was a low, menacing sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You'll never escape," he said, his eyes glinting with malevolence. "You'll never leave this place." I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized that we had to act fast. I looked over at Sarah, who was standing beside me, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to get out of here," I whispered to her. "We have to escape." Sarah nodded, her eyes locked on mine. "I know," she whispered back. "But how?" I looked around the room, desperate for a way out. That's when I saw it. A small window high up on the wall, partially hidden by a tattered curtain. I nodded towards the window, and Sarah's eyes followed mine. We both knew that it was our only chance. Without hesitation, we made a run for the window. The gaunt man shouted in rage as we climbed up onto the bed, using it as a makeshift ladder to reach the window. As we squeezed through the narrow opening, I could feel the gaunt man's bony fingers grasping for us, trying to pull us back. But we were too quick. We dropped down to the ground outside, landing with a soft thud on the damp earth. We didn't stop running until we were deep in the woods, the gaunt man's mansion far behind us. Finally, we stopped to catch our breath, leaning against the trunk of a massive oak tree. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "We escaped." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "We did," I said, "but we're not safe yet. We have to keep moving." Sarah nodded, her face set in determination. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's go." And with that, we set off into the unknown, determined to put the horrors of the gaunt man's mansion behind us. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The gaunt man's eyes seemed to be boring into my soul, and I knew that he would stop at nothing to get us back. We had to keep moving, had to find a way to stop the gaunt man once and for all. But as we walked, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay in store for us. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. He experimented on me. He twisted my mind and body. I shuddered at the thought of what the gaunt man was capable of. We had to stop him, no matter what it took. And so, we walked on, into the unknown, determined to bring the gaunt man to justice. As we walked, the darkness seemed to press in around us. The trees loomed above, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. Sarah clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What if he finds us?" she whispered. I tried to reassure her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The gaunt man's eyes seemed to be everywhere, boring into my soul. Suddenly, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. "What's that?" she whispered, pointing to a faint light in the distance. I followed her gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. The light grew brighter, illuminating a small cabin nestled in the heart of the woods. "Maybe we can find help there," Sarah whispered, her eyes filled with hope. I nodded, trying to stay calm. We approached the cabin cautiously, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we stepped inside, a warm fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. An old man sat in a rocking chair, his eyes fixed on us with a piercing gaze. "Welcome, young ones," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I've been expecting you." I exchanged a nervous glance with Sarah. Who was this old man, and how did he know we were coming? The old man seemed to sense our fear. He nodded sympathetically, his eyes filled with a deep understanding. "I know what you're running from," he said. "I know about the gaunt man." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "You do?" she whispered. The old man nodded. "I've been watching him for years. I know his secrets." I felt a surge of hope. "Maybe, just maybe, we have found an ally. Can you help us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The old man nodded, his eyes glinting with determination. "I can help you," he said. "But first, you have to know the truth." Sarah and I exchanged a nervous glance. What truth could the old man possibly reveal? The old man leaned forward, his eyes boring into ours. "The gaunt man," he said, his voice low and menacing. "He's not just a monster. He's a businessman." I felt a surge of confusion. What did the old man mean? The old man's eyes seemed to glint with a knowing light. "He sells organs on the black market," he said, "and he's been using his victims to experiment on." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "That's disgusting," she whispered. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. We had to stop the gaunt man, no matter what it took. The old man nodded, his eyes filled with a deep understanding. "I can help you," he said, "but you have to be careful. The gaunt man has many allies." I nodded, trying to stay calm. We would stop the gaunt man, no matter what it took. And with that, our plan was set in motion. The old man handed us a map, worn and torn, but seemingly accurate. "This will lead you to the gaunt man's hideout," he said, his eyes serious. "But be warned, he has many guards, and they won't hesitate to kill." Sarah's eyes widened in fear, but I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We had to do this." "Thank you," I said, tucking the map into my pocket. "We'll be careful." The old man nodded, his eyes glinting with a hint of sadness. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more," he said, "but I've been watching you too. You're resourceful. I think you can make it." I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "We will," I said. "We have to." As we left the cabin, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. We were going to stop the gaunt man, no matter what it took. Sarah and I trudged through the woods, following the map to the gaunt man's hideout. The trees seemed to grow taller and darker around us, casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The gaunt man's eyes seemed to be everywhere, boring into my soul. But I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. We had to stop the gaunt man. Finally, after what felt like hours, we saw it. The gaunt man's hideout, looming above us like a monolith. It was an abandoned warehouse, its walls cracked and crumbling, its windows shattered. But despite its decrepit appearance, I could sense a malevolent energy emanating from within. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear as she clung to my arm. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We go inside," I said. "We stop the gaunt man." Sarah nodded, her face set in determination. "Let's do it." And with that, we stepped inside, into the heart of darkness. As we stepped inside, the darkness seemed to swallow us whole. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and I could hear the sound of scurrying rodents coming from the shadows. Sarah clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't like this," she whispered. I tried to reassure her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The gaunt man could be anywhere, waiting for us. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing off the walls. The warehouse seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth of corridors and rooms. As we turned a corner, I saw a figure slumped against the wall. It was one of the doctor's victims, his eyes vacant and unseeing. Sarah gasped, her hand flying in her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. I felt a surge of anger and determination. We had to stop the gaunt man, no matter what it took. We moved on, our hearts pounding in our chests. The warehouse seemed to be shifting and twisting around us like a living thing. And then we heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing off the walls. The gaunt man was coming for us. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear as she clung to my arm. "What do we do?" she whispered. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. We had to get out of there fast. But as we turned to run, I saw the gaunt man standing in front of us, his eyes glinting with malevolence. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've been waiting for you." I felt a surge of fear as the gaunt man began to laugh, his eyes glinting with madness. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on a cold, metal table. The gaunt man was standing over me, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to sit up, but sharp pain shot through my head, making me gasp. "Where's Sarah?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The gaunt man chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, she's around here somewhere," he said. "Don't worry, you'll see her soon enough." I felt a surge of fear as the gaunt man began to laugh again. I knew I had to get out of there fast. I tried to struggle, but my wrists and ankles were tied to the table. I was trapped. The gaunt man leaned in close, his breath cold and rank. "You're going to make me a lot of money," he whispered. "You're going to help me with my research." I felt a wave of horror wash over me. What kind of research was he talking about? And then I saw it, a tray of surgical instruments lying on a nearby table. The gaunt man's eyes followed mine, and he smiled. "Ah yes," he said, "the doctor's special tools. He's been using them to modify his patients." I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized what was happening. The gaunt man was going to operate on me, just like he had operated on the doctor. I knew I had to think fast. I had to come up with a plan to escape, and fast. But as I looked around the room, I realized that I was trapped. There was no way out. And then I heard a noise, a faint rustling sound coming from the corner of the room. I turned my head, trying to see what it was. And that's when I saw her. Sarah, crawling across the floor, her eyes fixed on mine. Sarah's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a glimmer of determination there. She was going to try and rescue me. I tried to signal to her, to warn her away, but she just kept crawling, her eyes fixed on the gaunt man's back. The gaunt man was too busy preparing his instruments to notice Sarah's approach. I held my breath, praying that she wouldn't get caught. As Sarah crept closer, I could see the fear in her eyes, but also a fierce determination. She was going to save me, no matter what. Just as the gaunt man was about to make the first incision, Sarah made her move. She lunged forward, grabbing the gaunt man's arm and pulling him away from me. The gaunt man spun around, his eyes blazing with fury. "You little fool," he snarled, raising his hand to strike Sarah. But I was free now, my wrists and ankles no longer tied to the table. I launched myself at the gaunt man, tackling him to the ground. The two of us crashed to the floor, punching and kicking. I could hear Sarah screaming, trying to get my attention, but I was too busy fighting for my life. The gaunt man was strong, but I was determined. I managed to pin him to the ground, my hands around his throat. As I looked into his eyes, I saw something there that chilled me to the bone. A deep, abyssal evil that seemed to stare back at me. But I didn't let go. I kept squeezing, feeling the gaunt man's life slipping away. And then, suddenly it was over. The gaunt man's body went limp, his eyes frozen in a permanent stare. I stood up, panting, and turned to Sarah. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Let's get out of here," I said, grabbing her hand. We ran, not stopping until we were back in our car, speeding away from the warehouse. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe yet. The gaunt man may have been dead, but his legacy lived on. And then I saw it, a figure in the back seat, watching us. It was the doctor, his eyes black as coal. "We're not safe yet," he whispered, his voice like a sigh from the grave. And with that, everything went black. When I came to, I was disoriented and groggy. But as my eyes focused, I saw the doctor sitting in the back seat, his eyes still black as coal. Sarah was sitting next to me, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sit up. The doctor leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the rearview mirror. "I've been trying to break free from the gaunt man's control," he whispered, "and I think I've finally succeeded." I stared at him, unsure of what to believe. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something there that gave me hope. A spark of humanity, a glimmer of recognition. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The doctor smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "I'm taking you to my hospital," he said. "You two need medical attention." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. "Okay," she said. "Let's get help." As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe yet. But with the doctor's help, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in hours. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor led us to a private room, where two nurses were waiting to attend to us. The nurses quickly got to work, treating our wounds and administering medication to help us recover from our ordeal. As the day passed, Sarah and I began to feel more and more like ourselves. The nurses were kind and attentive, and the doctor checked in on us regularly to make sure we were doing okay. As we rested, the doctor came in to see us, a somber look on his face. "I want to tell you what happened to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah and I exchanged a curious glance. "What do you mean?" I asked. The doctor took a deep breath. "I was kidnapped by the gaunt man," he said. "He's been using me to perform twisted experiments on his victims." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. I felt a surge of anger and disgust. "How did he control you?" I asked. The doctor's eyes dropped, shame and guilt written across his face. "He used some kind of mind control," he said. "I don't know how it works, but it's powerful. I've been trying to break free for months." Sarah and I exchanged a sympathetic glance. We couldn't imagine what the doctor had been through. But as we looked at him, we saw something there that gave us hope. A spark of humanity, a glimmer of recognition. After a day of treatment, the doctor came in to see us, a smile on his face. "You two are doing great," he said. "I think you're ready to go home." Sarah and I exchanged a glance, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. We were going home, but as we walked out to our car, we realized that it wouldn't start. The engine was dead, and we were stranded. The doctor smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, I'll drive you home," he said. We gratefully accepted his offer and climbed into his car. As we drove through the streets, I felt a sense of normalcy wash over me. We were going home. When we pulled up to our house, Sarah and I looked at each other, feeling a sense of relief and exhaustion. We were home. The doctor smiled and patted us on the back. "You two take care of yourselves," he said, "and don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." We thanked him and watched as he drove away. Then, we turned to each other and hugged, feeling grateful to be alive and safe. As we stepped inside our house, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. Our ordeal was over, and we could finally start to heal. Sarah and I looked at each other, and then we smiled. We were home, and we were safe. And with that, our nightmare finally came to an end. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please let me know in the comments.